More than 1,000 years before Sauron's return and the War of the Ring, one of his greatest servants unleashed a campaign of destruction that would stretch across 6 centuries and change the fate of Middle-earth forever. The Witch King of Angmar, most terrible of the Nazgul, orchestrated a strategy so devastating it would not only shatter a kingdom, but erase it from history itself. They called it the War of Angmar, but war suggests a simple clash of armies, of sword against sword and shield against shield, and victory won through strength of arms alone. What truly unfolded in the Northern Realms was far more sinister. A slow, calculated annihilation spanning centuries. The Witch King's target was Arnor, the great northern kingdom of the Dunedain. His mission was not conquest, but extinction, the destruction of a realm that had stood since the end of the Second Age. Through centuries of calculated violence, dark sorcery, and political manipulation, he would dismantle one of the mightiest kingdoms of men, piece by piece. To understand how such a catastrophe came to pass, we must first return to the roots of his target, the Númenórean kingdom of Arnor. In the year 3320 of the Second Age, amid the shadow of Númenor's destruction, Elendil and his sons, Isildur and Anarion, fled to the shores of Middle-earth. There, from the ashes of their drowned homeland, they would forge 2 mighty realms. While his sons sailed south to establish Gondor, Elendil claimed the northern lands, founding the kingdom of Arnor. From his seat in the gleaming city of Annúminas, he ruled lands that stretched from the ice bay of Forochel to the weathered hills of Cardolan. But in the year 861 of the Third Age, King Eärendur's death triggered a succession crisis that would create the first cracks in Arnor's foundation. Within months of their father's death, 3 sons of Eärendur split their father's realm. Amlaeth, the eldest, claimed the western lands and established Arthedain, where the pure bloodline of Isildur would endure the longest. His brother Thorondur took the southern regions, founding Cardolan among the ancient Barrow Downs. The youngest, Eldacar, claimed the eastern territory of Rudor in the shadow of the Misty Mountains. Over the next 4 decades, what began as an administrative division calcified into true separation. By the year 900 of the Third Age, 3 kingdoms stood where Arnor had once ruled. Brothers became rivals as borders hardened, and over the centuries, Arnor's proud unity faded into memory as 3 lesser realms squabbled over their birthright. 4 centuries passed after Arnor's division, years filled with growing tensions between the 3 kingdoms. Then, in the year 1300 of the Third Age, the first whispers of a new power reached their borders. The Witch King, mightiest of the 9, had come to the north. In the cold, inhospitable reaches beyond the Etten Moors, nestled in the shadow of the northern Misty Mountains, he raised the fortress of Carn Dûm. Its black towers rose like spears against the grey sky, a monument to malice built by hands both mortal and monstrous. This was no mere warlord seeking quick conquest. For the next 50 years, he patiently assembled his forces, drawing power from sources both expected and sinister. The orcs of the Misty Mountains answered his call, drawn from the peaks of Mount Gundabad and the depths of forgotten mines. These scattered tribes found new purpose under the Witch King's iron will, transforming from disorganized raiders into a disciplined army of darkness. The realm he built would be called Angmar, and from its blackened gates would come the doom of the North Kingdom. But the Witch King did not strike immediately. He watched, waited, and planned. The divided kingdoms of the Dunedain, caught in their petty rivalries, could not see the greater threat growing in the frozen wastes beyond their borders. Their endless feuds over borders and birthright blinded them to the darkness gathering in the north. In the year 1349 of the Third Age, as the Witch King's fortress of Carn Dûm entered its 5th decade, King Argaleb I ascended the throne of Arthedain. The royal bloodline of Isildur had failed in both Cardolan and Rudar, leaving Argaleb as the last true descendant of the High Kings of Arnor. Recognizing both duty and the peril of division, he laid claim to all of Arnor, seeking to restore the lost unity of Arnor under a single crown. The nobles of Cardolan recognized the wisdom in this claim and pledged their allegiance to Argaleb's banner. But Rudar had changed. The Dunedain there had diminished, their numbers too few to resist the rising tide of outsiders. Into this vacuum of power stepped a chieftain of the Hillmen, a warlord with no claim to the blood of Númenor. Seizing the throne for himself, he cast aside all remnants of Dunedain rule. His power was not his own. His allegiance lay not with his people, but with the shadow growing in the north. He had become a willing instrument of Angmar. Argaleb moved swiftly to counter this threat. He fortified the Weather Hills, creating a defensive line anchored by the ancient watchtower of Amun-Sul. Towering battlements rose over the ridges, watchposts stood upon the heights, and defensive trenches and barricades lined the strategic passes. From these vantage points, the warriors of Arthedain and Cardolan stood together, their eyes fixed on the eastern horizon. As the last snows melted in the spring of 1356, the forces of Rudor and Angmar struck. From the misty mountains and the frozen wastes of Carn Dûm poured an army unlike any seen before in the north. The hillmen of Rudor charged alongside organized companies of orcs. Behind them came darker things, horrors whispered of only in fearful tales. Among these were hulking trolls, wielding massive clubs capable of crushing armor and bone with a single blow. Accompanying them were packs of wargs, demonic wolves of unnatural size and cunning. These beasts, ridden by orcs or roaming independently, loped among the armies, their burning eyes gleaming through the darkness. Their howls echoed across the battlefield, sowing fear into the hearts of their enemies. The battle that followed would be remembered as the Battle of the Weather Hills. King Argaleb himself led the defense, but he fell defending the very walls he had built. His banner, once raised high against the shadow, was torn and trampled beneath the march of Angmar's hosts. Yet from this tragedy, Arvaleg took up his father's crown and sword. Arvaleg, son of Argaleb, with the help of Cardolan and Lindon, drove back his enemies from the hills. And for many years, Arthedain and Cardolan held in force a frontier along the Weather Hills, the Great Road, and the Lower Horwell. The Witch King of Angmar did not forget this defeat. The intervention of the elves revealed that as long as the elven havens stood strong, Arthedain would never truly stand alone. Yet Lindon lay far beyond his reach, its coastal havens shielded by the vast wilderness of Eriador and the Dunedain, who still resisted him. But there were other elves, closer, more vulnerable. In the heart of the valleys, east of Rudar, nestled among the mist-shrouded peaks of the misty mountains, lay a hidden refuge, a place of wisdom and ancient memory, where the light of the Eldar had not yet been extinguished. Imladris, the last homely house. The Witch King turned his gaze upon Rivendell. From the blackened gates of Carn Dûm, his armies marched. The wild hillmen of Rudor led the charge alongside the twisted creatures of Angmar, orc legions, fell spirits, and nameless terrors from the frozen wastes. The siege of Rivendell began, and the fires of war burned at the feet of the mountains. Within the sacred halls of Imladris, Elrond half-elven stood undaunted. He bore Vilya, the Ring of Air, the most powerful of the three rings of the elves, yet even its strength alone could not shatter the shadow that now surrounded his home. And so, Elrond sent word across the mighty mountains, calling upon his kin, the Galadrim of Lothlorien. The siege was broken, and the armies of Angmar were cast back. Yet this victory would prove bitter, for while the eyes of the elves were fixed upon their borders, the kingdoms of men lay vulnerable. In the year 1409 of the Third Age, with his dominion over Rudor secured, the Witch King launched a devastating assault, this time to Amun-Sul. But it was more than a fortress. It held one of the 7 Palantiri. a seeing stone of the ancient world where the kings of old had watched over their lands, seeing across vast distances and uncovering the movements of their enemies. Such a weapon should not remain in the hands of the Dunedain. And so, in the same year, he struck once more, this time with the full force of Angmar behind him. They crossed the Horwell and poured into Cardolan, the southernmost of the Dunedain's fractured kingdoms. Cities were put to the torch, fields were trampled, and at last Amon Sul was surrounded. There, King Arvaleg I, son of Argaleb, stood upon the windswept heights. With him were the last great defenders of the north, but the fury of Angmar was unstoppable. Amon Sul fell. Arvaleg perished in the battle, and many of the bravest warriors of the Dunedain fell beside him. As the enemy laid waste to Amon Sul, a small company of loyal men carried the Palantir northward to Fornost. But the Witch King was not content with mere conquest. He did not intend to capture Weathertop. He intended to erase it. And so, as his army stood triumphant, he gave the order. The mighty watchtower, built in the first days of the North Kingdom, was razed to the ground. The loss of Amon Sul was more than a fall of a fortress. It was the shattering of the last great link between the divided realms of the North. Without the Palantir's far-seeing gaze, without the high vantage of Weathertop, the ability of the Dunedain to coordinate their defenses was crippled. With Cardolan devastated, the road south now lay open. Angmar's armies poured through the breach like a dark flood. For a time, Arthedain stood alone. The Witch King's victory seemed absolute, and with Cardolan fallen, only the last kingdom of the north remained. But the war was not yet over. Months passed, and the armies of Angmar gathered once more. With Fornost in his sights, the Witch King prepared to strike the final blow to the Dunedain. Though King Arvaleg had fallen, his bloodline endured. Arafor, still young, now bore the weight of a dying kingdom upon his shoulders. Angmar's legions stood at Arthedain's doorstep. The kingdom was surrounded, its warriors battered, its people weary. The last of the Dunedain braced themselves for what seemed to be their final hour. And then, from the western shores, a light appeared. The elves had come once more. Círdan, the shipwright, ancient and wise, led forth a host from Lindon. Clad in shimmering mail, their banners bright, they rode to war. Arafor took up his father's sword, and together again, men and elves stood side by side. The armies of Angmar were driven from Fornost and cast from the North Downs, and with the warriors of Lindon, Rivendell and Lothlorien striking from every shadow, the Witch King's forces found no peace across Eriador. For the first time, Angmar was forced to retreat. The Witch King withdrew to the frozen halls of Carndum, and Arafor reigned for many years after, his kingdom still standing. Yet the shadow in the north had not lifted. For nearly 2 centuries after Arafor's reign, Arthedain stood alone against Angmar, locked in an unending war of attrition. In the year 1636 of the Third Age, a different kind of darkness crept across the land. This was no army of orcs or hillmen, no host of dark creatures bearing swords and shields. Instead, it came as a whisper on the wind, a creeping death, unseen and merciless. The Great Plague. From the distant lands of Rhûn, it swept westward, striking Gondor first, where it claimed King Telemnar and his heirs, then spreading northward. In Cardolan, it accomplished what the armies of Angmar could not, claiming the last remnants of the Dunedain who had stubbornly clung to their ancestral lands in the Barrow Downs. For the first time since its fall, Cardolan was truly empty. And in that silence, the Witch King saw his opportunity. Upon the Barrow Downs, Tyrn Gorthad in the ancient tongue, he unleashed his most terrible sorcery. He summoned shadowy spirits from the abyss, wraiths of malice and cold hatred, and bound them to the tombs of the Barrow Downs. These new lords of the Downs would come to be known as the Barrow Wights, and they were a terror to behold. The Barrow Downs, once a sacred testament to the glory of the Dunedain, became a place of unending horror, where no living soul dared tread. In the year 1851 of the Third Age, hope flickered anew in the north. King Araval of Arthedain, great-grandson of Argaleb II, sought to reclaim Cardolan and restore the lost kingdom of Arnor. He gathered what remained of his people and called upon the elves of Lindon and Rivendell, forming a new alliance against Angmar. For the first time in centuries, the banners of the Dunedain and the Eldar flew side by side on the battlefield. But though the armies of men and elves had vanquished Angmar's warriors, they could not undo the deeper evil that had taken root. The Barrow Wights still lingered, and the people feared the land. Despite Araval's victory, the people refused to return. Thus, the land of Cardolan remained a silent realm of ghosts, where only the dead dared to dwell. The Witch King's strategy had succeeded, not through battle, but through fear itself. The Witch King's mastery of strategy extended far beyond the northern battlefields. Even as his forces pressed Arthedain, his eye turned south to Gondor, the other great realm of the Dunedain. In the very same year that Araval attempted to reclaim Cardolan, a new threat emerged from the east: the Wain Riders, fierce warriors who rode upon great war wagons that thundered across the plains. Their timing could not have been more devastating. With both the northern and southern realms under simultaneous assault, neither could come to the other's aid. Many whispered of a dark puppeteer behind these coordinated attacks, one who understood that divided, the realms of the Dunedain would be more vulnerable than ever. For nearly a century, both kingdoms fought their separate battles, their forces stretched thin, their resources drained. Then, in the year 1940 of the Third Age, a chance for renewal emerged. Through the marriage of Prince Arvedui of Arthedain and Firiel, daughter of King Ondoher of Gondor, the ancient bonds between North and South were rekindled. This union tied the bloodlines of Isildur and Anarion together once more, a symbolic promise of unity in an age of growing darkness. But here too, the shadow of the Witch King's influence could be seen. When King Ondoher and his sons fell in battle against the Wain Riders in the year 1944, Arvedui saw an opportunity to realize the dream of a reunited realm. As husband to Firiel and heir of Isildur, he laid claim to the high kingship of both Gondor and Arnor. The Council of Gondor's rejection of this claim, led by Steward Pellindur, seemed to arise from practical concerns about Arthedain's diminished state. The north was too weak, they decided, too battered by centuries of war with Angmar to rule the south. Instead, they crowned Eärnil, a victorious general who had proven his worth against the Wain Riders. The council's decision to crown Eärnil instead of Arvedui served the Witch King's purposes perfectly. Though Eärnil sent promises of aid to his northern kin, Gondor's conflicts would ensure these promises remained unfulfilled. In the winter of 1974 of the Third Age, with Gondor distracted and the North Kingdom standing alone, the Witch King unleashed his masterstroke. The armies of Angmar descended upon Arthedain with overwhelming force. Fornost fell. The proud capital of Arthedain, which had endured for centuries, became a slaughterhouse. Its streets, once walked by the heirs of Numenor, ran slick with blood. Flames swallowed its great halls, and the banners of the Dunedain were trampled beneath iron-clad feet. King Arvedui, the last heir of the northern kings, fled northward with his remaining people and sought refuge among the Lossoth in the ice bay of Forochel. During this time, Arvedui's son, Aranarth, informed Círdan the shipwright of his father's plight. In response, Círdan dispatched a ship from Lindon to the ice bay of Forochel to rescue the stranded king. The Lossoth, wise in the ways of their treacherous waters, warned Arvedui against setting sail while winter still held the bay in its grip. But desperation and hope drove him aboard the rescue ship. Tragically, a fierce storm arose, and the vessel was lost beneath the crushing ice of Forachel. With Arvedui's death, the line of kings in the north was broken. Arnor, the proud realm founded by Elendil himself, ceased to exist.